Hey, I'm Sam, and I just wanted to show you my process for making a landscape here. So to start off, I have a blank canvas. To start off, I'm just going to start sketching. I don't really have an idea right now, so I'm just going to start, filling in the foreground, middle ground, background. And if I don't like something, I'll just get rid of it. Ooh, wrong layer. Oof. So I'll just get rid of that. Oop. Be sure to make a new layer because it's very helpful. So yeah, I'll just kind of start coming in, making a rough sketch, kind of just to show, where my foreground is, where my background is, middle ground, everything, just to lay it out. Just going to put in some mountains back here, just to show. And this is really just to help me place everything first, and get my composition right. And then after this, I can start sort of filling in details and putting objects in the space as well. I'm also going to start sort of filling in where I want my clouds to be. I'm just making a nice outdoor scene. It's nothing special. I'm going to kind of mark where my sun is going to be as well. One thing to remember about clouds is they're not flat. They have it's not just like a flat background or anything. I mean, clouds have volume just like everything else, so always sort of keep that in mind when you're doing something like this. I'm just sort of sketching. Okay, so we've got a very simple scene. It's just a bunch of hills with some sort of vague mountains in the background, maybe. So I'll just start sort of going more into detail. Maybe putting in like a tree here. And I'm just sort of like implying, these things. I'm not like trying to fully sketch them out quite yet. So I'm just going in, kind of erasing as I go. I might add in some like little details like this tree. I might just start adding some lines there. And some like grass lines as well. Sort of, just as I go to make sure that I know what it is. And just gradually, you kind of want to start vague. That's what I kind of do with all of my drawings. Is I start broad and I start kind of vague, and then I just gradually add more detail. So I might like put in some kind of scratches here just to kind of imply that, hey, maybe there's some flowers over here, maybe there's like some longer grass, things like that. So now that we've got this, next step is to do some values. I do this, now I'm going to use my brackets key to really up my brush tool. I'm just going to like overlay black here. And then I just down the opacity and get a nice mid value, because I always like to start mid-tone so I can go dark and light as I want to. And then I just start to add layers for each sort of value that I want. So whenever I'm doing a landscape, it's always important, I like to know where the light is coming from. So here we have, it's sort of in the back there from the sun. So I'm going to sort of roughly put the values down like this. I'm going to actually make my brush a little bit harder, because I don't really like to work with soft brushes that often, actually. I like to have sort of hard brush, especially for things like this where it's it's not like actual, it's not the meat of the painting yet. So right now I'm just sort of giving values to my main like foreground, middle ground, background, so I can get the lighting right. So the foreground is probably going to have, I'm doing sort of a backlit sort of scene, I guess. So the foreground is going to be the darkest, middle ground is going to be middle of the road. Sort of fill in, this tree is in the foreground, so I'm sort of filling it in. And then background is sort of light. Like this, yeah. So we sort of have this sort of scene. And this looks sort of cartoony right now because it's just, 4 values kind of stacked up. But you're going to see we're going to go in and sort of give it more detail and give it some more values within. And I'm just going to lighten these up. So, okay. So now I'm going to come in with a light value and sort of emphasize where my light's coming from again. One thing too, although I didn't in this video, I often start from the back and work forward with these. Let's see if I can get that behind. Yeah, I can. I like to sort of, it's always a good idea, I think, to start from the back whenever you're doing a landscape and work forward to kind of understand, what your sky is or whatever is in the background is going to be like. I think it's always usually easier that way. Because also things will generally have more detail the closer they are to the foreground. So here's that. So we've kind of got an idea of what our sky looks like. Just sort of roughing them in. So from here, I'm just going to Control-Shift all of these layers and Control-E to merge them all together. And start adding some more detail. So I'm just going to use, let's see, Control-Z. I'm just going to use my Alt to pick up some colors and just sort of put that down. So I pick up some colors, some values from other places in the canvas, and I start sort of, you can come in with them and just sort of dab them on like this. Sort of come in with light tones here and start giving some more like 3-dimensionality to these hills here. I'm going to Alt again. Okay. Ooh. There we go. Let's see. Control. Yeah, and for the most part, you're going to want to stay and have full view of your canvas whenever you're working, especially early on, because you don't really want to go, you only want to zoom in when you're doing fine details, really, and that's sort of a later step, one that we probably won't get to in this sort of session, but yeah, you want to keep the full canvas shown so you can see everything together. Make sure you're not, there's no like inconsistencies with your work. So right now I'm just going in with lights. And I'm going to start maybe taking some darks as well. So again, this is all pretty quick. So I'm not going to get a lot of time to really flesh this out. But you kind of get the idea, like, go in and sort of start putting in values as you go. I'm going to put in a little bit of darker values before I head to the next step, just because I feel like it needs some dark. And again, you should always keep in mind where your light source is coming from, and keep everything consistent. It's very helpful. Using references is really, really helpful when doing this, especially when you're just starting out. So from here, whenever I go to color, I make a new layer. So I've got my general, values. Whenever I go to color, I definitely start with the back here. And I just sort of pick a color, just vaguely what I know I want. So sky, generally going to be blue. Although maybe, hey, let's make something sort of different. Let's have an orange sky. Why not? So I just have that. I put it on an overlay layer and sort of see how that works. And I like to do this to keep the values that I have, because one thing about a landscape is or any kind of art, is you really want to keep in mind your values and make sure there's lights and darks. And you can sort of get lost in that when you're doing color. It's sort of, especially when you're starting out, it's sort of hard to keep that in mind and keep that straight. So now I'm just sort of, you can see I'm just sort of like really roughly going over with some color. You can see that the type of green that I chose, because I have sort of an orange sky background, the type of green that I chose was actually more in like the yellowish side, because typically you want to, colors are relative, so typically, if I chose something like on the bluer side, next to that, it would really look blue, next to that orange. So I didn't really want that. Let's get rid of that. So I'm sort of keeping in like a yellowish tone right now. So now I'm going to go for the bark. And again, keeping it really simple. Now after this, I tend to, so once I sort of get a rough down, I'll go in and I will get my, my background color, use Alt to color pick that. And I'll kind of go in, one thing that especially is with landscapes is this thing called atmospheric perspective. And that will, it's basically things in the distance will kind of fade out. So for example, those background hills will sort of have more of a tint closer to what the sky is because they're farther away. And that can be applied, throughout the whole painting. So I'll have this and then go in again with this middle ground hill. And sort of fade that out. So you have a little bit of depth with your art. So from here, I would go in and I would actually start cleaning this up. I like to, I have a problem where I like to merge all of my layers consistently. I hate having too many, layers at once. So I tend to just sort of merge them all the time. So let's get my brush, and I'll just start. Now I will get my opacity down. I'll make sure that my pen pressure is going. I will get a softer brush a little bit. Again, I don't like to go too soft. I like to always have sort of a hard brush. I'll just color pick. And go in like this. And just start like giving these values, giving them three-dimensionality. And maybe I'll have like, maybe I'll have sort of a rim light up here. Let me bring that hardness up. I'll bring that opacity up as well. So I'll have sort of a rim light like this, where the light is hitting the hills in the back. And then kind of carry that in. Now, you'll kind of see, like I said before, I like to start messy and go detailed later, because it's always easier to lay out where things are than to painstakingly paint something and then come back and find out that it's sort of wrong or it looks bad on the canvas and overall. So I think it's better to get an overall sense of what you're doing. That's why I say never zoom in early on in your painting process. Keep it zoomed out so you get a picture of the whole piece while you're setting it up. You can sort of play with the opacity layers as you're painting. But I'm kind of coming in now. Now I won't be able to finish this, of course, because this would take several hours, I'm sure. But you can kind of see we're at the beginnings where I'm starting to add some highlights, some shadows. I've got sort of a color palette going, and from here I would just gradually, in several passes, start to clean it up, make it sharp, add more details as I go in. But as far as the basics, that's really my process, and that's really, I think, a good way to start it out. So I hope you had fun learning how to draw landscapes. I'm Sam, and bye.